Welcome, and thanks for taking the time today. I'm Charlie Imbergamo, Director of Strategic Programs for the Nonprofit Leadership Center. We have a few of our NLC teammates and board members in our session today. So on behalf of all of us, we're delighted to have you with us as we continue our mission to develop and connect nonprofit leaders in this virtual space from far and wide. The pandemic has changed the way of work for all of us, with more and more folks engaged in either remote or hybrid work, traveling in and out of known and unknown virtual networks, using either personal or employer-issued devices. In addition to October being our 11th annual leadership conference, October is Cybersecurity Month. And for what we're hearing from nonprofit leaders, never has there been a greater need for awareness and mitigation of risk. So this topic seems very timely. Data security for nonprofits in a remote workplace. Before we delve further into our work today, we want to acknowledge the pain and the suffering of those who are impacted by ongoing struggles, as well as recent national and global events. Let us take a moment to raise them to our consciousness. Thank you. We are very fortunate to have a cybersecurity professional who advises clients on the identification and mitigation of cybersecurity risks. Kadian Douglas CPA, who is passionate about supporting and advising clients, as well as mentoring others. Kadian is one of Clifton Larson Allen's IT cybersecurity leaders and has expertise in a wide range of industries, including nonprofits. Kadian provides services to clients, including information security assessments, IT governance assessments, enterprise-wide and IT risk assessments, compliance and audit services, IT general and application controls, and data privacy and gap assessments. She's authored presentations and webinars and seminars on various topics, including vendor management, risk assessment, information security frameworks, policies and procedures, IT auditing and governance. She also chairs CLA's Young Executive Team and is a member of CLA's Business Security Advisory Group. Moderating our session today is my teammate and colleague, Karina Kletter, NLC's Program Associate. Karina has been an awesome driving force in this work in providing accessible virtual experiences for our participants. She's passionate about our work and the commitment to respond during this time with hope for what the future holds. She will take us through some of the rules of the road for our time together. Karina.
Thank you, Charlie. So just a few of the rules of the road for today's webinar. To minimize background noise and distractions, all lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website in the next few days. You may have noticed that we have live captions enabled, which is a Zoom accessibility feature. If you find them distracting, or if you would like to see them but don't see them yet, you can enable or disable them by going to the bottom of your Zoom screen and clicking on the icon that says CC Live Transcript. Once you click that, click the button that says Disable Auto Transcription or Enable Auto Transcription. We warmly welcome your questions. Please type them in the chat box as they come up for you, and we'll take 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for Kadian to answer as many as we're able to get to. If you haven't found the chat box yet, go to the settings at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on chat. And if you haven't already, please share the name of your organization in the chat box. We're so delighted to have Kadian Douglas with us today and look forward to a great informative webinar. On to you, Kadian.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for that introduction. And so as I am working now and getting the slides put together, I'm really looking forward to an engaging session today. I typically enjoy being in person. And so this for me, I'm going to treat it as though we're in person. So Charlie, could you confirm that my slide is being shared?
Confirmed.
All right, thank you everyone. So yes, as I mentioned earlier, I would have loved to be on site with you in person, because I love when I'm presenting to walk around the room and engage with you. And we do feed off of each other. So you'll see that I am standing right now. So if you see me move a little bit, it's because I'm trying to imitate what I would be doing if I was in person with you. So it's great to be here today. Thank you for all of you who signed up. So with regards to our presentation today, I know you heard some introduction about me. I just want to give you a little bit more background as to what I may be doing when I'm not at work. I know that first slide may say, well, you are doing cybersecurity. So what were you doing when you're not working? I love to read about what's happening in the cybersecurity space and to share them on social media, specifically on like LinkedIn. So you will see that I tend to try and share at least say once a week or so what's happening in the cybersecurity space. And so that's one thing I enjoy doing. I'm also passionate about sports, and I am a former Division I athlete where I definitely learned what it is about time management and the various times we had to travel almost half of the weekends out of the year. So definitely something I enjoy doing. And I enjoy traveling and giving back to the community. And so when I had the opportunity to do this presentation, I was very excited to do it. And so thank you again for having me today. All right, and so the pandemic, something that everyone talks about all the time. It's like you can't go anywhere without hearing about it. But that definitely generated a lot of discussion around a lot of other things, which includes our IT infrastructure. What are we doing to make sure that we are protecting our IT infrastructure? And individuals who said, now, I enjoy and I know what it's like to work remotely, so now I want to work remotely again. So that's something we want to focus on today. And then what kind of risks are there? We knew most of these risks existed before the pandemic started, but now some of these hidden risks are some of what we're going to point out today. And, when it comes on to this ever-changing risk and from a remote workforce and the demand from employees that they want to work remotely, how are we going to keep our information safe? How do we keep the organization's data safe? All right, so today's learning objective, as you saw when you were registering, then we just want to identify what those risks are. How do we ensure that we continue our business or day-to-day operation as if our team members were still on site? And then what are some things that we could put in place to ensure that our policies and procedures represent us as to who we are and what we are doing on a day-to-day basis? So what I wanted to share here a little bit is some common risks that are associated with remote work. And so, as I said before, if I was on site, I would be engaging with you. And as I share on social media, to come prepared for an engaging presentation today. So the first engagement that I would hope that you just appease me a little bit is if you could share some risks that you think are as a result of a remote working environment. So for the remote working that's happening now for a lot of our organizations and a lot of individuals asking to work remotely, could you share in the chat maybe one or two risks that you think nonprofits and organizations have to be facing right now as a result of working remotely? All right, I see public Wi-Fi, all right, working remotely, those who want to go and work in a coffee shop or work somewhere instead of maybe working from home. How are they utilizing safe network? All right. Confidentiality. That is something I'm going to go into a little bit later here. And local computers. Oh my God, I see you guys are definitely seeing my presentation. I think maybe someone shared my presentation earlier before I did this. Bring your own device securities. Most definitely. I am loving these comments that are coming in and the personal laptop use. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much for participating. This is a very good warm-up. So it seems as though we will definitely have a lot more participation going on as we continue this session. So some of what I wanted to share then relates to what's listed on the slide. You see here then, as IT individuals, we had to focus on protecting our infrastructure on site, right, locally. But now as employees and coworkers are going to work from home, our threat landscape has increased, right? And so now we have a bigger area that we have to focus on, including home networks. So that's something that's a risk that we have to consider when we do risk assessment as a nonprofit. We put the burden now on employees to secure their home networks. We knew that when the computers were on site, right, and we were the one who had to protect them, we know what we were doing and what we had to do. Now we have to make sure that we're relying on employees to make sure that their networks are secure, making sure that they are not logging on to unsecure networks or Wi-Fi, as someone mentioned in the chat earlier. We put personal lives, right, and our work lives together now, right? And so it's easier for us to be distracted, right? And our attention is stretched thin. And so most times if something happened and there's the work that's going on and the kid running to say something or something, it's easiest for us to find and pay attention to that personal situation that's going on, may get up and leave our computers unlocked, right? And so the risk definitely increases when we are working at home. Targeted attacks. How many of you received an email about, there's a contribution that you can get as a result of COVID-19, right? And if you take this survey, then you can get this contribution, you get this donation. There's so much more, there's such an increase in attack as a result of individual working remotely, because the bad actors now say, okay, you're not inside working, you're not working at the company right now. And so as a nonprofit, okay, you're working home, let me see how much that I could try to get you to click on these emails and to answer calls or to do something that I want you to do, that maybe if you were working on site, the IT person maybe would have caught it. And of course, we love convenience, right? And so we always talk about that 5 minutes of inconvenience may help you from a security for a year or for a lifetime. But a lot of us, we prefer not to be inconvenienced by having maybe add a separate password or making sure that we save the document in the right place. And being at home, it definitely provides the opportunity for not handling data securely. So with this, then we figured it may be a good idea just to show a few facts of what was happening in cyber world in 2020 when the pandemic was in place. So we had ransomware. I think we've all heard this word used so many times. I think the other word that when I talk to my clients or prospects that they hear more or the same would be phishing, right? And so from ransomware perspective, we'll talk about it a little bit more. It's so big right now that individuals are making it a part of their business now. They don't even bother going to work or going to school anymore. It's like they're buying and selling. It's like a wholesale and retailer business at the moment. Can you imagine that every 39 seconds, there is an attack going on? And as you can imagine, most of this is being done by phishing email. And I'll talk a little bit later around how important that is then to making sure that we are securing our network and training our employees to make sure that they're paying attention to what's unusual, right? Something that they're not used to seeing or coming from someone that they do not recognize. And when I researched and I saw this fact, 434% increase in small business cyber breaches. I can imagine, right, as I saw in the chat here, there are quite a few of us who are considered a small business, right? And even if you're not a small business, there's also an increase in attack and on your business as well, all because of a lot more people are at home now and the bad actors have more opportunities. And then there are those who are getting into that space now because of how lucrative that business is. So during COVID-19, when people were not traveling, the extra time that they had, those who didn't teach themselves to hack or who are already hackers already had the time to try and do that. And so there's an increase in attacks on our nonprofits. The FBI noted as well, that there's about a 300% increase in reported cybercrime that you are seeing. And so if you could also appease me one more time in terms of the number one breach level, in terms of what would be the cause of your organization having a breach. What do you think is the number one? Do you think it's maybe because of IT infrastructure that is not secure? Do you think that it's from human error? Which one do you think is the highest, as the highest percentage? Most definitely human error, right? It's human error. One, maybe because you're distracted, maybe because you clicked on the wrong link. We are the worst offenders when it comes on to our organizations being at risk. And so that's why it's very important that we're making sure that as employees go and they work remotely, that they're getting the necessary training to make sure that they are not clicking on the links that they should not be and let bad actors into our network. So as you can see there, 95% of cybersecurity breaches were due to human error, right? We always say, well, we're not updating our infrastructure, we're not doing the patches, we're not doing so forth. But for the most part, they would not be able to come in or as easily if we are not letting them in, if we're not clicking those links, if we're not taking those calls, if we're not opening those emails or opening those attachments. And so from a human error perspective, that's something I'll talk about a little bit later here. And so in terms of, incident response and policies, that's the third bullet on our learning objective. Imagine 77% of organizations does not have an incident response plan. I think that the pandemic brought this to light to individuals about how important this is in terms of knowing what to do when there is an issue, who should be involved, what the next steps are. And so if you do not have an incident response plan in place, I would highly encourage that that's something that you consider putting in place, especially now with so many individuals working remotely or wanting to work remotely. And then having a bad actor on your network. Sometimes when we get hacked and they said, okay, you got to pay us this or pay us that, we think that they're literally just getting on the network, but they are not actually. They've been there for a while. As you can see, it's about 6 months that a bad actor is on your network before you identify it. At a nonprofit prospect called me the other day and said, well, at this point, we're going through a ransomware attack. Could you guys help us? Okay, so our forensics team went out there, incident response team went out there, and only to realize that they did do backups, but they were not testing the backups. And somehow the bad actor was able to get access to the backup because it was still connected to the network and damaged a portion of it. So I'm trying to restore that, it wasn't even a possibility. And it was financial statements for about 9 months that they lost. Right. And they asked us, is there a way to help them, like a different area in a CLA to help them to see if we can go ahead and build back all the debits and credits that they put together for 9 months. Just imagine the human capital and the headache that's causing, all because a bad actor was on the network and they did not know it. The bad actor was definitely watching everything that they were doing, where the backup was going and so forth. Did not have logging and so forth in place to happen. And so we initially did not know how that bad actor got in, but it came down to the individual was at home working, course, and it was a distraction when the email came in, right? They were taking care of their children and so forth, and they had to step out to do some laundry, and there was just a lot going on that day. The email came in, they thought it was coming from one of the executives, and they end up clicking that link, and the bad actor got in and was there for months before they definitely went ahead and take all the information because the nonprofit would not pay to get the data back. So just something I wanted to identify from a remote worker perspective, that risk is definitely live and is there as we continue to work remotely. So, briefly, I got into the ransomware a little bit then, and what that really means, right? As you can see here, I mentioned they see this as a business. In their eyes, there's no point right now in going to school anymore or in trying to go get a job, because if you can be 12 years old and getting paid by someone to say, okay, try to hack this company. Those younger kids, what they're trying to do is they try to hack the low-hanging fruit. And so they are crafting some of the best emails out there by pretending to be the CEOs, pretending to be the COOs, and pretending to be the presidents and so forth of a lot of these nonprofits. And so as an employee, I may not be paying attention when I am working at home, and I may know that, oh, this is the president from my nonprofit, that sent this email, so let me open it, by not realizing that it did not say .org or it did not say .com. It said .comee or something like that, right? We didn't pay attention to that, to the fact that also you got to look and see, is it first name, or last name, first name at the name of the company, or did it just list the name? So those are just some little things that we can look at, that we could train employees to look for when they're working remotely, so that we can reduce some of the risk of having a ransomware attack. One thing on the slide that I want to point out as well is that when it comes down to ransomware, a lot of us think that, okay, they go ahead and they take our data, or they would lock up our computer, encrypt our computer, and then say, you know what, you got to pay us. And once you pay us, we will allow you to get access to your data. You see there, double extortion is definitely something that we're seeing a lot more among some of the engagements and consultation engagements that we do. Because if they have 6 months to sit on the network, they are exfiltrating data, right? And so they are taking data from you. And then when they're done taking the data that they want and get all the information that they're looking for, then that's when they go ahead and they lock you out. And they say the first step is to, okay, you better make sure you pay me to get this. But then they already have all the sensitive data that you need. So the next thing they're going to come back and say is, if you want your data back, you got to pay us this, because I have Kadian's social security number. I have this person's bank account number that gave you a donation. I have this person's name and address that gave you a contribution, you know. And so then you're going to be worried about reputational risk, going to be worried about, we're already nonprofits and have to worry about ongoing sustainability and ongoing contribution, donation, and program revenue, and so forth. And so to worry about reputational risk, that's something we have to think about, but sometimes we don't even have the funding to pay. And then if we don't pay, then we have to deal with the reputational risk. And so going to work at home and working remotely, definitely something that we need to make sure that we're focusing on the potential risk as we continue to train our employees. That brings me to the life-work separation, right? And so don't worry, I won't ask another engagement question yet, even though some of you would really love that. But because I'm guessing you would not put it in the chat if I ask, how many of you use your home PC for work? Tell me. I'm sure you're not going to put it in the chat. Feel free to put it in the chat, though, if you would like. No, please don't do it. But I would hope that you're not using your home PC for work, as it's not a good idea. One, because when you use your work PC, you have an IT department that's focusing on updating that computer, making sure that the necessary patches are being added, making sure that if there's any infection, if it's infected and anything like that, they'll make sure that they wipe the computer, get it safe again. When we open various nonprofit data on our personal computer, we give bad actors access to that data, right? And then at that point, then they are able to use that to either get back at us, to figuring out where we go, things we do, sending us emails to make us seem more trustworthy, and performing social engineering on us. And so it's highly discouraged to use a home PC. And if it's something that you have to do based on the nonprofit's approach or risk, then making sure that there are significant controls in place, and maybe even working in the cloud. So an individual would not be able to save anything at all on their computer. They would have to log in, and the computer is just pretty much a shell to access the data. And then, of course, from a cloud storage perspective, a lot of us are using personal Dropboxes, Google Drive, and so forth. I remember getting called to do an assessment last year for security review, and the individual was sending data through that person's Google email rather than using their work email. And the individual said, well, I was using my personal computer, so I thought it was okay for us, to just go ahead and send it that way. And Google is safe, right? Because the company also used Google Gmail. Well, there are different strengths of whether you're using a corporate account compared to a personal account, and how strong those are. So I had to let the individual know that they definitely want to make sure that they're not using personal email like that. And then when you have individuals at home using your computer, then you run the risk of downloading software that you should not, right? Someone may go ahead and download those. And then it may also come down to, responding to email. They may respond to email that they should not, and they may go ahead and access sensitive data that they should not be accessing. And so, I got a chat that came in about, the integrity of using G Suites and Gmail for nonprofits. We have seen where some of these Google accounts that are being used, they can definitely be a good option to use, but you got to make sure that we're using the right corporate account and make sure that it's a secure one as well. Because if we're using personal accounts, then the risk goes up exponentially. And so some nonprofits ask us, well, okay, then we can't afford to use this or that, but we want to use the Gmail. I said, we never distract anyone or prevent anyone from using the Google emails. But when it comes down to that, we just want to make sure we're following all those best practices from a cloud perspective. Google is also considered a vendor. And so when you go ahead and use their corporate email, you want to make sure that you're checking as well to make sure that how did you onboard them? What are they doing to secure your data? What access do you have? Who can access the data? What can be downloaded, and go through the proper due diligence channels as well to make sure that that is being done. So thank you for that question. Storing nonprofit information on a remote PC, as I mentioned earlier, you have the cloud applications, you have the nonprofit server. So go ahead and making sure that the data is stored on the server, because if you have the data on your home computer, you run the risk of your kid maybe accidentally deleting it. If you have friends who come over and they're using your data, then they will have access to that sensitive data as well. And the data is not protected. So as we mentioned earlier, do not send confidential email over unsecured email. And so those are just a few of the risks that you see, and you put quite a few of them in the chat when I started earlier, right, about what it is about work when you work remotely. Life and work can work together, right, as we talk about, but we just have to make sure that we're putting the right controls and mitigations in place. And so what we're going to talk about now is what are some of those controls that are in place. And so before I get to that, what I would like to do, I'd like to put a poll question in place, right? And so the polling question would be relating to the home internet connection and which one are you using. And so I think Karina will help us to get that poll going. So I know that it's a simple question here, but which internet connection do you have in place at home at the moment? Are you fully hardwired? Are you mainly wireless, or you just have some Wi-Fi that you travel with? Or are you using both? All right. And so from what we are seeing here, it seems that wireless is where it's at. Most people wireless from a convenience perspective. At one point, hardwired was the main thing that individual would be using, but because of the convenience now being able to move from one room to the next, we want to make sure that most people go ahead and use wireless. And so what are some of the risks then that we are seeing when it comes on to the wireless perspective? As you can see there, right? That's what we're seeing. You have about 28%, you have about 61% who say that they do wireless. So thank you so much for participating. All right. And so now we want to talk a little bit about then what are the controls that are in place when it comes down to your home Wi-Fi. And so from a home internet perspective, when the Wi-Fi is set up or the network is set up, as my friend just mentioned to me, I mentioned this weekend actually, we were talking about her Wi-Fi, and I looked and I saw where it said, welcome guests. You are welcome to use my Wi-Fi. I think something around that. That's what she had. And so I mentioned to her, I said, so when was the last time you changed your password or your username setup? It's just the way that the password was written. It just seemed like a generic one that was provided. She said, oh, I've never changed it. She's been living at this location for about 4 months, but I've never changed her username and password. But yes, still it's broadcasted in the living room that everyone could use it. And so what we want to do is to make sure that we're changing those security user IDs and password so that a bad actor is not able to drive around in the neighborhood and through those generic password that's provided by the provider to be able to get our wireless information, because once they get that, then they're now able to look at what it is that we're reading, what kind of information we're using, especially if we do not have a VPN that we're using at that time. So we want to make sure that we do not broadcast our network ID either, make that as private as possible, right? And thank you for sharing there that using private Wi-Fi is definitely an approach that you'd want to go to make sure that you're securing the data that you are using. And then from a controls perspective, how do we make sure that we patch our employees, right? They are, as I mentioned before, and as you mentioned, and as you typed and noted, we are the weakest link. We are the ones who will go ahead and click on things that we should not be clicking on, right? And so if we train employees, they could help to be the first line of defense for us, right? And if there's an issue, they'll be the one who will go ahead and say, you know what, let me go ahead and escalate this and share this with everyone. So if you have, any thoughts about, should I be doing cybersecurity training consistently? Should I be making sure that this is done on an ongoing basis, or how often? You would want to consider doing that as soon as possible. And so here's one of the other engaging one that I would like to just see. What was the last scenario you had for your security awareness training? In the chat, just let me know, what was it that was provided for your last security awareness training? Or when was the last time you had a security awareness training, right? There's some individuals who do them on a monthly basis, some individuals who do them, some companies who do them annually. So go ahead and share the last time that you did a remind employees to call before forwarding questionable email. Okay, that was a good training. That's definitely good training right there, right? I can't remember when I did the last security training. I just love the honesty right there, most definitely. So now that's something that now you're hearing this, hopefully you could go back and maybe encourage that nonprofit to say, you know what, we haven't done one in a while. Why don't we go ahead and do one? Someone did it last week. Okay, that's great. So another person said that it's done on an annual basis. So that's good to see. There are also individuals who none's being done right now at the nonprofit location. There's those who do a two-factor authentication, right? And the best practice of using those, right? And then mandating last year for every employee when they become remote to make sure that they're having those trainings 2 weeks ago. So I'm glad to see that there's some of us who are making sure that those trainings are done. But then for those of us who are not, thank you so much for sharing also. And hopefully the takeaway from this is these trainings should be done at least on an annual basis. At least. That is even not enough to prevent the bad behaviors that should be that's happening. But I'll show you here in a second. From a habits and practice perspective, you can see we do click on emails, right? We do click on email. I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed that my company has been phishing us consistently. And I could tell you, I am human, so I agree with you. It could be annoying, right? It could be another one again. Why me again? What I think what it does is it puts you on edge. So now every single email that comes through, I'm a little bit worried. I'm like, who sent this? Who sent this? Is it right? So as the person mentioned earlier in the chat, making sure that you're calling when you see an email, if you're not know who it is, that's a part of the training that we are getting here as well. And then in terms of sending sensitive data over email, that's something that we also get fished on. Oh, could you send me this for this person? Well, even though it's not a link that you are clicking on, if you get an email asking for data, you should not be sending that information via email, right? And so for those small shops doing training, those without an IT department, who's doing the cybersecurity trainings. And so I can provide feedback. So I will provide it at the end, but I think the question is going directly to the fellow nonprofit members. So feel free to share in the chat, and we can address that also at the end as to who is providing those training for you and how you go about it. And I'll also be sure to address that at the end as well. And then, from a connecting of infected personal devices, there are individuals who are doing that, right? Connecting those personal devices, to the laptop or computer that you have for your nonprofit. So what are you doing to mitigate those risks? Are you restricting certain items from being connected? So just want to share here briefly. Look at this. I mentioned about the training. If you only go ahead and you do 1 month, the percentage of someone being phished, look how high it is, right? And then you see the more we go down in terms of the more months that an individual is used to being phished, then the less likely it is that they are phish prone, right? And likely to click on those links. So we definitely want to make sure we're continuing those training, and let them say, this is annoying. Let them say, I don't want to do this. We're going to feel that way. We're employees and we don't want to deal with that. But at the same time, if we get on edge about our companies phishing us or giving us those training, it will prepare us for when the bad actors send us those emails when we're working at home, distracted by the laundry and the phone and the dog barking and everything. We will make sure that we always call whenever we get those emails. All right. All right. So one thing now I want to ask is a challenge question here for you. So you are going through and you're setting up your account and you see these 3 things, I say, okay, you went ahead and you we're going to select that. It's the second school, the second question that we're going to type. What would be your response? Where did you go to high school? So this is a challenge question that you are setting up maybe a bank account or something like that. What would you type in the chat? What would you type? What would be your response? Where did you go to high school? I'm guessing each of you are thinking, is she testing me right now? Right? Is she testing me to see what I'm going to type in here? Well, the encouragement would be to make sure that you respond to something else, right? My own high school, but probably I should not. Totally, maybe don't share, but I would not put your own high school that you put on there, because as a bad actor, if I know that that's your challenge question, then it's easier to just high school spray. I know we said password spray. So we'll just throw all the high school at that question to see if that is the response that you have on there. But if someone asks, where did you go to high school? Maybe answer, what is your favorite football team instead, right? And they wouldn't know that. So someone said, where did you go to high school? You could say, I love the Minnesota Vikings. I love the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I love, right? And so it's in a building. Love it. I love that question. That's something I should maybe try using for one of these challenge questions. It was a building located somewhere that I cannot remember. Something like that. Very good. Thank you so much. I love the participation in the chat. We want to make sure that we're using something different, not something that can be guessed. And so from a password perspective, who's seen this before? Who's seen that before? And don't worry, you're not calling anybody out, but have you been walking around an office or a building or go to someone's building and see this somewhere? No, just me. Okay, I understand why you wouldn't want to call anyone out. We're not calling anyone out, but that's okay. But I think I've seen it. I've walked around and I've seen these Post-it notes. Oops, I understand. No worries. We are one big family here today. We're a great big nonprofit family, and we're gonna make sure, like, what a family does when my sister is doing something I don't like or something, I nudge my sister and say, hey, maybe we should fix this. So let's do this together. So together we are gonna remove those sticky notes. We're going to lift up our keyboard and we're gonna remove the password from under the keyboard there, right? And we're gonna make sure that we're not writing down our passwords at home. Right? If someone or a bad actor should come in our home and see those, or one of our guests come, then they could log into the computer, or our kids could log into the computer. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that. All right. One more poll questions from me. So not the one that we're going to have posted, but I have a question. How long does it take to crack a 8-character password? How long does it take to crack an 8-character password. Majority of the nonprofits I work with, I've seen between 6 to 8 characters. That's what I'm seeing from the characters. So I figured I'll use the 8. But how long do you think it takes a security expert to crack an 8-character password? You can use seconds, minutes, or hours. A few hours, 4 seconds. Okay. I know you're thinking, I could see you typing 1 hour. Okay, seconds. I'm loving this. This is close. At least no one is saying a year. So that's a good thing. Okay, so let me go ahead and remove the suspense. There you go. So if we have individuals who have weak passwords or write down their passwords at home, then a bad actor could definitely be able to crack the passwords. You'll see if you have 6 characters, the hackers at CLA and all those bad actors out there, they could crack your password in 6 seconds. If you're using 7 characters, it's 5 minutes, right? And then 8 characters give you 4 hours, right? And so we encourage or recommend 14-character password. And then you could see there, when you get that close, you're in the millions of years that it's using. And so I mentioned earlier about, for passwords, you want to make sure that you're using passphrase. And if you're going to go to 14 characters, don't use the words for the long phrase like I love. I only use them because they're just one. So if you are on here, please don't hate me. Whatever your favorite team is, I love it. Okay. I'm just using the Super Bowl champions. Okay. So you can see, you can go ahead and you could say I, the uppercase L, the lowercase T, the Tampa Bay, and then you have the year that they've won, and then an exclamation. So when we're password spraying your password, we wouldn't be able to guess that easily, because it's, even though it's a passphrase, it's a passphrase using just letters within that word when you're doing that. So I know it's hard to remember long passwords, but put it to something that you like and something that's one of your favorite. And so, yes, there is an issue with answering. Thank you for that comment or for stating that, right? In terms of answering the exact question separately and having to remember what it is that you said. Just try and focus it on a theme then, and have 3 different things that you always answer. So if your question is always about the pets, and then also where you go to school, and then also where you grow up, then you could just interchange those 3, right? Because you would know what your 3 typical questions are that you use, and then you'd know that it's one of the other 2 that would definitely be used. So hopefully that helps a little bit, so that from a spraying perspective, in terms of what it is that we're actually responding to, it's not that easily guessed by the bad actors. And then also, if you're working remotely, you want to make sure that there's some VPN in place for individuals, not just to use just their password and username and password, but then also logging on again to log out, so that if there's any communication within that tunnel, the bad actors are not able to access it. And we also talk about, multi-factor authentication as well, right? You want to make sure that it's not just username and password, but how many of you have a push notification on your cell phone, or have to get a phone call if, before you can log in into your account, other than just using the username and password, right? So multi-factor authentication is talking about, something that you will know, something that you have, something you could see and things like that. So when you enter the username and password, you may say, okay, then, what is it, something that you know? Sometimes they do biometrics is also considered one of those multi-factor authentication. So in order to strengthen your password, and while individuals are working remotely, the risk that they are writing down the password or leaving the computer open, I think that definitely go up exponentially. So the more mitigations we can put in place, including other multi-factor authentication, is something to consider as well. That brings us to wrapping up with our 3rd area here in terms of policies and standards for securing a remote worker environment. And so, I like reading what some of the experts in this field are talking about, and these individuals who lead various security companies. And this is one of the quotes I was reading when the pandemic hit. Dr. Barbara said, companies and agencies without business continuity plans, right? If you don't have one, right, you're going to be sitting ducks for breaches, right? Hacking and data that is out there in the wild beyond the control of the company. And so I mentioned that to say, how did you feel, or how did your nonprofit go through the pandemic when all of this happened? I assume you just had to make a decision on the flip of a dime to say, okay, these individuals are working remotely, then if that's happening, now what, right? And so as a result of that, we want to make sure that we have procedures in place to respond. And I mentioned the incident response earlier. And so quick question for you. What are some IT policies that you have in place at the moment? Just name me, one or two or three of them that you have right now at your nonprofit. Any comments about any IT policies that you're currently using? And I am jotting down some of these questions, so I have them at the end. Okay, password manager. Okay, there's a response there. Okay, disaster recovery plan. Okay, great. I'm glad to see the interaction in the chat, as we're going through this. And the best way for us to learn sometimes is to talk to some of our fellow nonprofit members. And so as I'm going through the presentation, glad to see the engagement in the chat. But some of the policies that, you want to consider putting in place is to develop or review standards around your business continuity and disaster recovery. Incident response, like I mentioned before, if you're outsourcing any of your security, you want to make sure vendor management, who's doing what, when, where, and how. And then from a remote worker perspective, we definitely want to put a remote worker policy in place. I know that's something that in terms of talking to some of our prospects and clients, that they haven't put one in place yet because they thought that, the other policies that we have in place should be able to be good enough to support that. The remote worker helps to be more specific, right? It could be a 1 to 2 or 3 page one. I think one of the templates that we have right now is a 2-pager and the other one's like a 3-pager, where we add some information about, from a remote worker, you should do this, you should not do this. We're going to make sure that this is enabled, this is not enabled, who could access this, things like that, from what's allowed and what's not allowed from a policy perspective when it comes on to remote worker. And then of course you have the mobile device, bring your own. That's another policies that you'd want to have. Okay. So we have another polling question that we want to bring in, Karina. So if you could just share that polling question in terms of what type of technology environment do you operate in? And so if we could share that, what type of technology environment do you operate in? Is it primarily outsourced and cloud-based? Is it primarily in-house and locally hosted? Or do you have a mixture of both at the moment? What type of technology environment do you operate in? And, this is definitely something to consider, because some of the responses that we get from our nonprofit clients when we ask this question, or when we talk about security, is the first thing that they mention is, well, I don't think I have to do that because I have the vendor does that for me, or I outsource this, so I don't think I should be responsible for this, right? And so what we're seeing right now, it's somewhat, even between 1 and 3, right? We have about 48% is primarily outsourced and cloud-based, right? Then you have another 35% that's a mixture of in-house and outsourced. And then you have primarily in-house right now is 18%. And that's interesting to see, right? That's what we would expect, right? In the past, a lot more was on premises, right? And now a lot of us now are trying to move, whether it's since the pandemic or even before that, from a cost perspective, from a resource perspective, right? Security perspective, trying to go more to outsource that. So there we can see there we have about 46%. who said that they are primarily outsourced and cloud-based. Thank you so much for participating in that. Right. And so if that's the case, then, the responses that we tend to get about the fact that, my vendor should be doing that because I outsource, that's not the case. What we would say is that you are still responsible for ensuring that you understand somewhat of what they're doing for you and getting reports to make sure that, from a remote worker perspective, how are they protecting those? And especially if you're not working in the office all the time either, how much communication are you having with that third-party vendor? Because from a vendor management perspective, I mentioned a lot of individuals tend to focus on the fact that, when I am onboarding a vendor, I went through all these 15 things. But then from an ongoing perspective, the vendor may not always, they may put the best foot forward to get you and to get the business, but they may not be doing everything that's noted in the agreement, or as things continue to change, there may be new requirements that you're looking for from them. So just making sure that you're having these discussions and how much time can you afford to be down, right? What kind of vendor management processes do you have in place? You want to consider these things as you're updating your policies. And then securing your remote workforce, you want to make sure that you have those organization-owned devices are protected and secured as much as possible, encrypting them. And as you can see here, doing regular patching, regular review, doing some vulnerability scanning. We talk about penetration testing a lot, but the ongoing scanning that you do throughout the year will help to identify those bad actors that we mentioned that's on your system for 6 months, so that when you do the penetration test, it gives you more of that deep dive and see how far they could go. But the vulnerability scan will help to identify what's abnormal here, what am I not used to seeing, and now what am I seeing at the end. And from an employee-owned perspective, you want to make sure that those devices are also being protected, right? Employee-owned, they should be encrypted to protect any data that they are seeing for you. And then making sure that, forgive me here for a second, I think I just froze. So sorry about that, everyone. Okay, it definitely had to be one of those situations where during presentation, goodness, this is not exactly what I wanted to happen today. All right, so just bear with me here for a second. Charlie, can you still hear me?
Yes, we
We
can.
can still hear you.
Okay, my apologies. I have a little technical difficulties, and so I will be providing this presentation though, but hopefully you guys could hear and see me still. But from securing your network, you want to make sure that you are considering the who, the what, the when, the where, and the how as well, right? And through that perspective, whenever you do that, you're able to address, who can see what, who's permitted to connect remotely, and what they are permitted to access, right? So when are they able to connect as well? And then you also want to think about how is it that they can connect. So from a remote worker perspective, it's always something to try to make sure that we are focusing on considering, even when technology decides to disturb my presentation. And I think we're back on now, Charlie. So thank you for
Yes, we are.
for confirming that. And so the who, what, when, where, how is something that we want to focus on in terms of securing remote workforce and who can access our network. And so also when it comes on to securing the network, we want to make sure that you look at the organization's connectivity, the logging and knowing what it is that we're doing, how we're doing it, also what user is logging on, where they're logging on from, and the location, etc. That's definitely something that if we're reviewing consistently, then we'll be able to make sure that anything that looks abnormal, that we're able to address it. And so I think I have one last polling question for us as we are wrapping up here. And so the polling question has to do with how often do you review your IT policies? So could you share that for me, Karina? All right. And so how often are you reviewing your IT policies in place? All right. It seems like there's a race here for second and fourth. but annually and periodically. And I could see there's a race going, and I wonder who is going to win this race. All right, thank you. You guys are going there. There's a lot of individuals changing their minds in terms of how often you update your IT policies. And so in about 5 more seconds, I'll close the poll. All right, thank you so much for participating. And so it seems as though annually won that race. You could see it's about 48% say it's on an annual basis. And then those who said periodically, that's exactly what we would encourage, at least on an annual basis, that we're taking stock of what does our IT infrastructure look like, and what's in place for that. Periodically, someone could say, is it monthly, is it quarterly, is it yearly, how long does that mean? And so you could define that for yourself. But if there's a change in the environment, you also want to make sure that you're making that update. All right. And then a few other considerations with insurance and vendor risk. I put vendor risk here again, just because it's something that we want to make sure that we are paying attention to as well. And so if you definitely want to make sure that you're taking into consideration all the risk that exists, you want to make sure that vendor is one of those that, because we're outsourcing so much, and as you saw from the polling question, that where a lot of ours is no longer on-prem and on-site, right? We're definitely outsourcing to others, making sure that our vendor management procedures are in place and then being reviewed. And also from an insurance perspective, if all else fail and you're doing everything you're supposed to, and then some of these fail, and unfortunately if a bad actor get in, then hopefully the insurance that you have in place would be able to help. But remember, insurance only pays out if we do what we're supposed to be doing in terms of protecting the network. And today has been an amazing opportunity to do this presentation. And I hope that it was very much engaging. I was able to get through some of the questions that you provided. And apologies to those who where we did not get through all the questions for you. But please rest assured that I will be working with Karina and Charlie to make sure that I provide these responses to you individually, and making sure if you have any follow-up questions that we are providing them for you. And so Karina and Charlie, you guys want to join me back?
Sure. Thank you so much, Kadian, for this wonderful and timely presentation. It looks like we're just about out of time. So I think we'll be working with Kadian to make sure that she has access to the questions that were left in the chat box and can perhaps provide some answers as an addendum to her presentation, so that everybody has what they came looking for. So thank you again so much, Katie, and thank you to everybody that came and joined us live today. Have a wonderful afternoon. Charlie, do you have anything to add before we close things out?
Nothing further, Karina. Thank you all, and thank you, Kadian, very much.
Thank you, everyone, and appreciate the feedback.
Bye, everybody.